Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. I'm mostly better, although this cough is probably going to be lingering for like another month, so I'll always turn my head away from the mic so I don't blow anybody's ears out or anything, but just want to warn you in advance, there's probably going to be some hacking through this. And also I wanted to thank everybody for being so patient with me last week. I tried my best to get through last week's Q&A, and I think I was still definitely a little grumpy from being sick and a little loopy, so hopefully I did an okay job with it, but I'll try my best to do better this week. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, the importer said, do I think it's because of hard drive mods and easily available mod chips that we still don't have any PlayStation 2 optical drive emulators, or do you think there's a more technical reason behind this? This is still the system that sold the most units in its lifetime, so you'd think that we'd have more options. I am by no means an expert, and I've never just designed an ODE before, but it's my guess that it's both. I think a lot of the people who make ODEs that I've spoken to kind of had the attitude of, I'm going to work on other platforms first because you could just put a hard drive in for now. I don't agree with that at all. It's obviously their choice and their business, of course, but it's my personal opinion that agreeing with you that that's a large platform, and an ODE for the PS2 covers a lot of different use cases, even including DVDs. There's a ton of us who have ripped our collections to hard drives, and sometimes I imagine using a PS2 into an RGB monitor might be a really awesome way to watch those. So I think it's partly because of the other options, and I do believe there's some security issues that are now just starting to get over, like the Mechapone and all of that, and I think with a combination of all of that stuff coming together, we might see one, but it's obviously only up to the people who design these things. I also think too, different versions of the PS2 might require completely different assemblies and stuff like that, so I think while everything I said is a total guess, I do think it's just a combination of there's already a solution out there, and it might be a little harder to crack the security than on something like a Saturn or a PlayStation 1. Over on Patreon, Focus said, they know I don't recommend the Corio 2s that often, but the options for 1080p downscaling are very limited. GBSC would be fine if they wanted 480p to 240p, but 1080p to 240 is kind of a novelty, but they really like the option for classic re-releases. So you're 100% right, and this is one of the situations in which I absolutely would recommend the Corio. Follow Doherty's guide. It'll work fine. You'll get 2.5, 3 frames of lag on that. Alternatively, what I would not recommend is I've seen a few people take other Extron scalers that can go from 1080p to 480p and then put that through a different downscaler, and now you're talking about the same 3 frames of lag, but you're linking multiple devices together. I mean, if you already have those devices laying around, of course, go for it, but I just mean I wouldn't go out and purchase those extra devices to link together. I would rather just see people use and figure out how to work a Corio to do exactly that. You said I skipped over your second post. I thought it was a dupe or something, because I think it was a similar question. I was still kind of loopy, so my apologies. But you said you were still hoping to get my recommendation on one part of it. Do you have a recommendation on HDMI to DVI with audio breakout? Yeah. So I have a box that I have in the Amazon store. Just the same link I put in all the videos, that breaks out audio. It's just an HDMI audio extractor. So what you would want is that box, and then just any HDMI to DVI cable. I have those in the Amazon links as well. There's a couple reasons. First and foremost, that particular box works really well with the DataPath Visions. A lot of times when I have a cable that's more than a foot long, the data path kind of freaks out at the HDMI signal, because it's really, those cards were designed for DVI signals and analog. So when you're trying to feed it an HDMI signal, especially at higher resolutions like 1080p, it could freak out, and running it through another little device that I guess you could say reamplifies the signal. I know I'm explaining that part wrong, but putting that device between has fixed all compatibility issues. And it outputs optical audio, RCA digital coax audio, and through a 3.5 millimeter jack, just left and right stereo. So it's HDMI in, HDMI out, but you solve the output problem with a cheap but good cable that I have linked, and you have every audio option. So I've really found that to be good with everything, not just the data path, but anytime you need to break out audio. There is a limitation. I think it's 1080p 60 only, or maybe just a few resolutions above that, but that might not be an issue at all for your setup. You would have to just double check the specs. And I guess I'll go back and research for 4K 60 and 4K 120 compatible ones, I guess whenever I get a capture card that's compatible with those. Logan said, with Analogue retiring the NT Mini for the third time, do I feel they will produce a cheaper version in line with the Super NT? I'd love to get the NT Mini, but I can't justify paying $500 for a system made from aircraft-grade aluminum when it would be sitting in my entertainment center. 100% agree with you. And everybody, anytime I mention that buzzword analog, people freak out on both sides. I think their products are awesome. I'm obviously friends with and a fan of Kevin's work, but I don't think that that's the right system for everybody, and I don't really agree with most of their marketing. So I've thought that they were going to release a cheaper version of that a long time ago, and they instead keep trying to charge their customers $1 zillion for things that they didn't ask for. Most of their customers just want a really good NES. So I would absolutely, if you are in the market to use original cartridges, recommend the RetroRGB AVS. I haven't had any problems with it. I think a lot of the experts say it's not as accurate as the Mister, but as far as just a good overall experience, I don't have any complaints whatsoever. Of course, using a Mister is amazing, but there's just, the plain fact is some people want to use their original carts, and they don't want to mess with any setup. They want to plug it in, plug their card in, and hit power, and I completely respect that. So the AVS is fine. You also may or may not be able to use it on a CRT using an upcoming downscaler. So more info on that in a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's a very cool device. I'm definitely a fan of it, and I would recommend that right now, for anybody that wants it. I think it's about $200 and still in stock. And I still hope Analogue releases their N8. That's the trademark that they registered that we all assumed would be just a plastic version of that only plays NES and Famicom games with none of the extra cores. I hope they still do it. I still think there's a big market for it, but I stopped questioning why they do things because most of it doesn't make sense to me. Zane's dad said that me feeling better gave them hope. Being sick for a week is exhausting. So first of all, thank you to every single person who sent any well wishes, whether it's in these Q&As or just all over social media. I really appreciated that. It was very nice of you. I'm not going through them individually just to save everybody else's time. I did want to respond to Zane just because, yeah, being sick for a week is exhausting. Being sick for 3 weeks is maddening, and that wasn't even the longest I've ever been sick for. A year and a half ago, I think I was sick for like 6 weeks, with 2 of them being one of them being real bad and 2 of them being like a little before and a little after, sucking a lot. And it's just for me personally, it's from burnout. I burn myself out until my immune system shot. Then I catch something that probably would have really sucked for 3 days, and now it's a week or 2 weeks, or in this case 3 weeks. It's 100% my fault. I'm really trying to work on it, but if you get something that you're going to live through, respectfully, you got to know that just keep powering through it. Rest on the couch if that's what you need, or just, pretend that you're not sick and keep going if you have something much lighter. And it sucks a lot, and I feel bad for everybody that has to go through it. I'm going to try to keep myself healthier, but I mean, the moment I felt better and I jumped back into it, I did 3 14-hour days in a row. So I don't think I'm really good at pacing myself. I think I have an on switch and an off switch, and that's it. So I'm probably going to continue to kill myself until I succeed. So thank you for your kind words, everybody, and good luck to you, Zane's dad. I hope you get better soon. Chris Fratz wanted to jump in about the discussion regarding cheap capture cards, and wanted to remind everybody that those Cant links that I talked about last week only top out at 720p for 60 frame per second support, and you can do 1080p 30, but you get the bad and weird compression, or you could do lower resolutions with better compression. But in all honesty, I wouldn't pay attention or think about any of that. I would buy one of those cheap $18 cards with the mindset of this will work perfect with a RetroTink. It'll compress the colors, but if you're a casual streamer who just wants to hang out with your friends, who cares? If you want to capture at 720p 60 or stream at 720p, it'll be fine for that too. You could always just do RetroTink in and then line double it inside OBS and put a nice little frame, so you essentially get a 1080p 4X, which has enough room for a frame around it. So yeah, you're totally right, Chris, but from the context of I just want to stream with my friends. I haven't been out of my house in a year. I miss my friends. Let's all hang out together. Even if there's 4 people on the stream, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a pro streamer. You just need to get the video out so people could see what you're doing and hang out and have fun. And then decide if you want to go drop some cash on some better ones. You know, that blue box, which is hit or miss, is like 60 to 80. Everything's going up in price these days, so, you know, it could be. But, you know, and then, of course, you can go all the way to $200, $300, $2,000 solutions, depending on how crazy you want to get. But if your goal is just to play games with your friends, grab that $18 one, deal with the crappy compression, don't set your output to more than 720p, and you should be able to have a really good time on a very cheap budget. A question from Eric Hurley. They were going to make a Mr. SCART cable by cutting the end off a VGA cable and soldering a SCART connector on it. They'll be using the version 6.1 analog I/O board and not the HDMI direct method involving the DAC. Do you know if the cable needs any passive components in it, like resistors on the sync line, or does the Mr. output 75 ohm C-Sync by default? Okay, so I'm actually just about to do a post about this. I got to get some final pictures in, but I want to start with the positive side because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. First and foremost, the Mr. I/O board is designed to be the most versatile output board you could get for a Mr. You could plug a VGA cable into it and use a CRT VGA monitor. You could use a basic pass-through cable to get component video, and of course you can get RGBS or RGBHV through 240p. So it's designed to be the solution for everybody. There is nothing wrong with it at all. However, if you're going to a SCART solution, you need a 470 ohm resistor on the sync line. So if you're going directly from the Mr. into a PVM, double check your service manual before doing this, but a lot of the PVM models, not just from Sony either, will accept the higher TTL level sync. So you could just get a VGA to BNC cable, even if the cheapest cable you find is only a 5 BNC cable. No problem, just leave the 5th cable dangling and only hook up horizontal sync, and that's it. That's all you'll need to go directly into your PVM. But if you're going through any SCART equipment at all, switches, direct into a SCART compatible TV, whether it's a flat panel or CRT, doesn't matter. If you're going into a SCART port at all, you need to make sure to attenuate that signal to a lower voltage. Unlike a lot of other consoles, you don't have to worry about exactly where the components are placed. I put the resistor right in the SCART head, right on the sync pin, and then connected the wire to that. And it was, as far as I know, it was perfect. I'm sure if you maybe modded the I/O board itself, you might get a little bit cleaner sync, but that's not going to cause interference in most cases, and it's especially not going to cause anything that you would see on an average CRT, including PVMs. So I'm sorry for the over explanation. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't come across as saying the Mr. is broken, you need to fix it. The Mr. is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The only unfortunate part is there's a bunch of sellers selling pass-through cables designed for Mr. And once again, I got to backtrack and say there's absolutely a use case for a D-sub to SCART pass-through cable. And if you see sellers selling those, that's totally fine. There's a bunch of different things ranging from projectors to custom RGB setups for video games. I'm specifically talking about sellers that say, here is a Mr. RGB SCART cable, and they don't have the resistor in it. And I've emailed a few, and every one of them blew me off. It doesn't matter. Oh, well, we don't make them, we just sell them. You know, why don't you contact the person that makes them? All of them skirting responsibility, and it sucks. In fact, my post is going to be titled, Beware of Mr. RGB SCART Cables, which is shitty and clickbaity. I know that, but that's one of those times that I really want to get people's attention, just to tell them that, hey, everything's actually fine, but make sure you add a resistor. You could test it with a $7 multimeter, or you could pop it open, or you could just, get a resistor from a hobby shop for, a quarter and be done with it or whatever. So I want to make sure to get the word out there, because it is kind of gross that sellers are doing that. And it just, the voltage isn't so high where where it's like a super big problem, but it's not good to put that high voltage through SCART equipment. So I really want to see everybody get the right cable, mod theirs, and I would love to see sellers wake up and do a good job with this. And once again, not every seller does this. I'm just saying there are a handful of people out there that are selling branded 4-Mister cables that are not made right. There's plenty of people that make them really well. I'm talking to the bigger cable manufacturers to try to get a big stock in, because the only problem with a lot of the smaller sellers is they often sell out immediately, leaving people to find other solutions, and then they end up with a pass-through cable. So I kind of over-explained that one. I just really wanted to make sure I was very clear about everything. I don't want to pass blame on the Mr. team, because there's nothing wrong with it. I don't want to accidentally passive-aggressively shit on good sellers of cables, because there are so many out there. I need to make sure that people are aware of the issues and dangers for people that aren't paying attention, meaning the sellers that aren't paying attention, or for the users that just haven't been educated on it yet. That's why I get so upset at the sellers, because it shouldn't be something a user thinks about. You should just be able to say, okay, Mr. SCART cable, click, put it in my checkout, and it'll show up in a couple days, and I could use my Mr. on my analog setup, and that's it. So, but basically all you need to do is add a 470 ohm resistor, and you're good. 2 questions from Adam Cameron. First, they just bought a DE10 Nano. Can I tell me what other hardware they would need to buy? 128 megabytes of RAM, or case suggestions? I would buy the 128 megs of RAM if you want to have access to all of the Neo Geo library. You could probably get away with the 64 megabyte one. I would just look up which games would utilize each one, just to make sure. I got the 128 just because I didn't want to mess around. I just wanted to get the bigger one, but you might not need to spend all of that money. Other than that, I would just get yourself a good USB controller and go from there and decide whatever it is that you want. Cases are awesome, but those aren't necessary, so I would go based on your budget. There's a couple of different case options out there now. There's controller adapters that are good, but for using the Mister, the basic things are: make sure that, if you're gaming on a flat panel, you don't even really need an I/O board. Just get a decently fast micro SD card, only so when you transfer things back and forth from your PC, it doesn't take forever. Get the RAM and get a decent USB controller. And if you want to check that sheet from Mr. Add-on's Pork Chop, it's pinned on his Twitter, but that'll tell you which controllers have the most or least lag out of the ones that he's tested. I've had really good luck with some cheap USB controllers. They were decent enough build quality. I didn't notice any lag. So that should definitely get you started, and you could kind of decide from there where you want to go. Also, the other question: what are you drinking lately? Tea with elderberry syrup in it. I thought it would be a very good idea to just quit everything, including sweets, just for, I don't actually eat that many sweets, but just for a few weeks, just to make sure I bounce back and don't mess up my immune system by accidentally drinking too much one night or something like that. So, the last thing I drank was when as I was getting sick. I had a couple of Negro Modelos, and they tasted so good. So unbelievably good. I miss the taste more than I miss catching a buzz. Catching a buzz with friends is always a happy, positive experience, but the taste, I really love good beers and wine and even certain liquors. So I'm kind of just taking a break at the moment and going to see what happened. I was good with the sweets too, except Beast got me those Black Thunder Japanese chocolates, and I fucked up pretty much the whole bag. Those things are addicting. If you ever get a chance to try one of those, you can get them at Japanese markets in the US. Of course, you can get them in Japan, but that was a treat. That was last night, and wow, that was good. I bit into the first one. I was over a friend's house, and they're like, "That was an embarrassing look you just got on your face when you bit into that." I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. I'll probably get the same creepy look the next time I have a beer too. So, anyway, I'll hopefully I bounce back, got some more beer recommendations as the summer hits, and kind of go from there. Charlie Pierce picked up one of those Otaku 6-port SCART and RCA component switches. I really liked those. They were inexpensive, or at least cheap compared to other options. Everything's going up in price lately. I'll have a post explaining why soon for any non-nerds that are unaware. But they're affordable. They don't add any distortion to the image. They keep everything pretty clean. But it is kind of weird because if you don't know what you're doing, why are there actually 12 inputs when it says it's a 6-port? And why are there 2 outputs when there's only 1 output at a time allowed? So Charlie's direct question is, can I mix these inputs on the same Otaku switch, or do I need a separate switch for each? I wondered if I could just connect the Otaku SCART output to the OSSC SCART input, and likewise for a component, and presumably only connect either SCART or component to each particular input on the switch, but not both at the same time. I'm pretty sure you nailed it, but I'm going to reiterate it both to make sure I give you the right advice and for anybody else who's unaware of these things. So there's 6 inputs, but if you get the RCA and SCART version, each input you could choose whether you're using RCA inputs or a SCART input. You could only use one at a time. There's no exception to this. Audio, if you put video through the SCART connector and audio through the RCAs, but you can't double up on those. It's just not safe. It's gonna, at the very least, it's going to dim the image and make it look not as good at all. But you could totally mix and match. Input 1 could be component, input 2 could be SCART, input 3 could be SCART, input 4 could be component, whatever. It doesn't matter at all. Alternatively, if you're using the open source scan converter or like a Sony PVM that handles both RGB and component video, you only need to use one of the outputs. So if you already own a SCART cable, I would say that's the easiest, and just plug that directly from the switch into the OSSC. And whenever you switch to a component video input, just switch your OSSC to component video mode from the SCART port, and that's it. It will output both through it. That's why you can't keep 2 output connections plugged in at the same time, because I believe the outputs were connected. I haven't used one in a while, and I am coming out of being sick in a fog, so maybe I'm wrong. Please correct me in the comments, but I did spend quite a bit of time with it when I had one, and I believe that's exactly what it was set up to be. And alternatively, if you have a PVM and you're not going to an OSSC or anything like that, you could put, for example, all SCART inputs if you wanted, but then just use some RCA cables to do RGBS output from the RCA jacks into, with some BNC connectors into the inputs of your monitor. The only thing you can't do, once again, is have both outputs connected at the same time. However, if you're going to an open source scan converter, one very cool option might be to use the RCA outs to the inputs of a PVM, and then the BNC outputs of a PVM with one of these. I think I have one right here. Yes, one of these switchable SCART cables. So it's a SCART head with a switch on it for direction, and it's got BNC outputs, or inputs or outputs, depending on what this is plugged into. So you could always connect this to the output BNC connectors of your PVM and this to the input of your OSSC, and then same thing, just switch your OSSC and your monitor based on whether it's RGB or component. So hopefully I cleared everything up and didn't make it more confusing for you or anybody else listening. But yeah, it's, the disadvantage of putting double the inputs is it's confusing as heck for anybody that's not familiar. The advantage is the versatility of going back and forth and not really needing to worry about which is which, as long as you only use one input at a time, meaning one per switch, and one output at a time. Dan White said they picked up a Panasonic TH42 PWD6 plasma TV that has S-Video, composite, and component inputs, along with its VGA port. The info suggests that it was a decent piece of AV kit for professional displays, but nothing special. Either way, I'm pretty sure there's a good use case for it. I'd love to check out a Sinden light gun with it, for example. FYI, I know they're not a go-to device in the community, but it was free and looks great so far. Any advice or notes to get the most out of it? So I loved plasma TVs, and I also loved the very unique look that they had. At the time when they were released, the transition between CRTs to either LCD or plasma, I much preferred the look of plasma. OLED definitely is a step above, but The unique look I also thought translated really well to retro games. So if it accepts 240p input directly, it might look good just with that. And in fact, my old Panasonic Plasma, just using HD Retrovisions into the component ports, processed 240p correctly, and it was the same amount of lag as if I used a scaler. It was laggy. It was like 2.5 frames of lag, as I assume yours probably is too, but it wasn't so bad that it ruined the whole experience. It was definitely noticeable, and I wouldn't have a tournament on it or anything like that. But it wasn't ridiculous. It wasn't as bad as like using those SCART to HDMI boxes. Those are still awful because they're not for games. But I loved the look, and I also liked the unique way scan lines looked with it. I've never been a fan of artificial scan lines, but I liked them better on plasmas than LCD and OLED because it was almost too perfect on the OLEDs that I've seen. So my only suggestion to you would be to double check and look up what native resolution it runs at, and also double check to see if the inputs process the signal correctly. It is incredibly common to see component video inputs process 240p right, but not S-video or composite. So you'll want to keep that in mind when you're connecting your consoles and stuff like that. You might need a RetroTink to get the best look out of it, or you might not at all. So overall, it might be laggy, but if there's a game mode, of course, turn that on. But it should be a really awesome display that you could enjoy. I mean, I really loved mine. So I don't think, when you said it's not a go-to device in the community, it kind of was at one point. And there's always that useless debate of which was better, which is worse. But it's something that a lot of people do prefer. So if you got one for free, just enjoy the heck out of it. See if you could tweak it to get down to the lowest lag possible, and experiment with matching the native resolution versus just plugging stuff in and seeing what the internal scaler does. Gourd Captain wants to know if I have any recommendations for reputable third-party component video cables for the PSP 2000 or 3000. I don't know anything about those, so I apologize. I have no recommendation because I have no experience with them. Doesn't mean they don't exist. Every time I see something like that, I always get hate mail. I've been selling these cables for 6 years, and how dare you not tell me on your podcast that it's never. I don't intend to do that. I just honestly don't remember or know of anything like that. So, if there is something out there, no offense to anybody who's selling it, I just don't know about it. So I would try to find other people who have tested the outputs. And try to find people with a history of testing it right. I also don't mean to be disrespectful, but there are people that just, oh yeah, I plugged it in and it worked. They're totally great. You should buy them. But they actually had a lot of problems. They did work, but not well. So just, I guess, know where you're getting your recommendations from. And hopefully there's forums or Discord servers or something out there with people who could help. Kevin K wants to know if I have any recommendations on how to find a specific CRT. They're looking to upgrade from an old one a friend gave them, but they're not into CRT gaming enough to go full BVM or PVM, so they'd like to find a nice Sony Trinitron. Specifically, they have their eye on the KV32XBR48, but I've never seen one in the wild. Are there any specific places to look? First and foremost, why do you want that one? Either last week or the previous week, I talked a lot about why you would not want an XBR Sony CRT. I'll give the short version here because normally I wouldn't mind repeating myself, but I just talked about it for like 10 minutes, so I don't want to bore everybody to death who just listened to that one. No offense. But the short version is a lot of these HD CRTs process 240p signals wrong. So if you're plugging in a PlayStation 2, it's probably the greatest CRT you could ever expect for it. If you're plugging in NES, N64, Genesis, PlayStation 1, it's probably not going to work right. So please just go back and check through the previous Q&As for the much more detailed explanation of why you would or wouldn't want one. But to actually answer your question, Craigslist has been pretty good for me. You'll always see these scumbags that take a junky, useless CRT, try to sell it for $500, and because it says, for retro gaming, the best retro, they're all the same. The biggest difference when you're talking about used consumer grade CRTs, the average ones, not the HD ones, the biggest difference between 50 different brand, model, and sized used CRTs is the condition they're in. So, you could go hunt one down, on Craigslist. You could hunt one down on eBay. But if one of them's got a gazillion hours on it and the other one's barely been used, the one that's barely been used is going to look significantly better and probably last longer. So I would, if you're in the US, Craigslist is pretty cool. I would just keep my eyes open to different stuff like that and just understand that all of these things are a gateway to being ripped off. And if you're already here asking the question, you're probably have already seen stuff like that. I'm really saying this not so much for you, Kevin, but for other people who might be casually listening and think, oh yeah, I'll go get a CRT. Just don't fall for the scammers. They're awful, and it drives me nuts that the retro gaming community is getting overwhelmed with those. But and I also do want to reiterate the fact that any CRT is a great experience with analog consoles. So even if you did happen to get the HD one, you could put a retro tank into it with a converter. You could only use it for 480i and 480p stuff. There's always something you could do with a CRT as long as it's in good working condition. So maybe the one that you're currently using is too small or only has RF input. That's totally cool. Hold on to it. Just keep looking somewhere and find one that's bigger. Find one with an S-video input even if you can, or component if you're lucky enough, and go from there. But they're all going to be good experiences. The only bad experience is a near dead CRT or using the wrong converter on a flat panel, I guess. Alex S. wants to know my opinion on using an HDMI coupler to make a long cable out of 2 or 3 other HDMI cables. My opinion on that is as long as you're using good quality stuff, as long as it's not too long, it shouldn't matter. So as an example, I have a TV on my wall in my bedroom that I have an HDMI cable dangling out. I think might be a 6-foot cable, and I use that for any of the videos that you see with the LCD TV. It's next to a desk, so I always drop the console on there. I plug that right into whatever the scaler I have, and then I set my camera up, and that's how I do the TV shots. And occasionally I'll have a device, like when I was testing those crappy HDMI cables with the HDMI part built in, I would just use a coupler for those. There were a few scenarios in which I had another device that, I needed to use some kind of coupler. Maybe it was a DVI to HDMI cable, and I didn't want to take the TV off the wall to get to it. In that scenario, we're still talking 10 feet or less of cable, maybe even 12 feet or less. So it was never an issue. 0 problems, no matter what. But once you start talking about 25 feet, 50 feet, then it always becomes a problem. And it's the same problem as if you just bought a really long HDMI cable. So I would try it because it's not going to harm anything just to give it a try. If you see like green speckles or you keep getting signal dropouts, you can get HDMI signal repeaters. If you have a splitter or an audio extractor laying around that you're not using, you could stick that in the middle and just not connect the extra stuff to it. So I guess just the short answer is it'll either be fine or it won't. Give it a try. If it works for you, cool. And if it doesn't, you'll have to get some kind of repeater. Victor is Perfect said they've slowly been adding to their LaserActive collection over the years and have recently added quite a few more notable titles. While their collection is by no means complete or expansive, they'd like to do their part to contribute to preservation, considering some of the LaserActive titles are completely unique. They know there's a project years ago trying to preserve Laserdiscs in general, and I recall brief mentions of people finding ways to rip the Laserdisc titles. It's an easy way to summarize it, but you're right, Victor. It's not officially ripping, but it kind of is at the same time. So that project that you're talking about is the Doomsday Duplicator project. You could search RetroRGB. I've mentioned it a few times. I've done an interview with the 2 creators of that project, and they have a Discord server now where people hang out at. And those are definitely the people that you want to talk to. Ideally, you would find somebody in your area who already has this setup. You could check with them to see what games haven't been backed up yet, or which games need more copies of the backup to make a more complete and accurate version. Or if you're a crazy nut like me, maybe you'll want to buy one of those setups and rip your own. The only reason I didn't is just simply because I have no room left for anything. And if I ever am able to get a house, that's on my list of things that I would love to have. And I would probably use it once a year, but I guarantee every time I used it, it's going to be one of those situations situations where it's like, I'm so glad I was able to help. This is totally worth it. Now the world has a backup of this. So it's totally up to you. But I think at the very least, it would be worth checking out their Discord and talking to the people there and seeing what's been archived and what hasn't, and just kind of going through them. But it's very cool of you to want to try to do that. So I wish you the best and hope that that all works out very easily. Kevin LeBlanc has a question about an SRGB install. It's a very common question and a problem that a bunch of people have run into. But I don't like giving too much advice towards this. I'll elaborate in a second. So basically the issue is that a friend modded their front-loading NES with one of these NES RGB kits and an SNES multi-out. So it essentially should be able to take any cable that's built for the SNES, any RGB SCART cable. If you've wired S-Video and composite, it should use that as well, and it's not working. With respect to your friend, 99.9% of the time it's because they did the installation wrong. You need to change certain things on the board for this to happen. You need to make sure to run composite video, or at the very least 75 ohm level C-Sync to the composite line for the HD RetroVisions to work. And you have to make sure all the jumpers on the board are set properly and everything like that. So that's something that you got to talk about with your modder. If they don't know what you're talking about when you say that to them, you should refer them to forums or discords or places where pro modders do this on a regular basis, and hopefully somebody would reach out to help. If you're in a situation now where RGB SCART works perfectly, but HD RetroVision cables don't, you could get an RGB to comp or something like that. But I genuinely think that the mod should be done right, and it should have been done right from the start. There's really... It's not like an official standard that Nintendo stamped, but the whole retro gaming world has pretty much made it so that if you install something with an SNES multi-out, it works exactly like an SNES multi-out to avoid stuff like this. So with respect to you, your friend, I'm not throwing shade, especially if it's the first time they've done one of these mods. How would you ever know that unless you'd asked the question? But it just sounds like the mod was done wrong. Couple of questions from Jason Guffey. First, they're really loving their SCART coupler for short connections, but are wondering what I suggest for similar situations with other connections like HDMI or RCA. So my suggestion for that is to try to pick what fits best for your setup. I have a 1-foot HDMI and a couple of 1-foot RCA cables that most of the time work really, really well. Sometimes just for pictures and stuff like that, an HDMI coupler would have looked a lot nicer. I bought these RCA couplers, which sometimes work and sometimes don't. Based on your questions, I get the impression that you don't mind tinkering, especially when it wouldn't cost too much. So if you want to mess with RCA couplers, give it a shot. Just don't put too much pressure where you could bend or break the inside of a connector. But overall, I would definitely say just pick what's best for the overall setup. There was definitely a few times I had a 1-foot, really thick shielded RCA cable that was a massive pain because it kept, it was so thick and strong that when I tried to curve it to get into the shot for my video, it would like pop over, and it was, sometimes they drive me crazy. So the couplers can sometimes be a big help. I would just give it a try. Second question, they remember on a stream that I mentioned Lacuna Coil a while back and forgot how much they love that band. Yeah, I've seen them live a bunch of times. They're awesome. Are there any more rock and metal bands with a female singer that you recommend? Yeah, 2 Weeks, of course. That was the band I was in with a musician named Gina, who was a badass. She was an amazing drummer. I haven't talked to her in a while. I'm sure she still is, but amazing drummer, great songwriter, great singer, good enough guitar player to play the shows. I don't mean any disrespect. She could do all the other things, so why not? But I loved being in that band. I loved writing those songs. Those are not typically my favorite songs. Like, if you were to say, like, what's your favorite stuff to listen to, I do listen to my own stuff. Maybe that's narcissistic. I don't know. I wrote the songs for me to listen to, so whatever. But it's not as metal as I normally like, but it's definitely the songs that I wanted to write and wanted to play. Of course, my friends in Answer Infinity. Love that band so much. Their album's on iTunes. Alicia is just an absolute monster and a lot of fun if you ever get a chance to see them live. I don't think anybody's going anywhere for a while nowadays, and I think smaller bands that weren't previously on global tours probably are barely even going to do local gigs, just because it's like there's so many people out there trying to make a living. It's like, let's let as much as a lot of us love this hobby. Let's let the people make their living, go out and do their shows, and then the smaller bands could probably come back as a hobby, a little bit after that. I'm just speculating, people are going to do whatever they want, of course, but yeah, I mean, absolutely love Answer Infinity. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's any other really good ones. There's certain songs over the years that have stood out as really amazing and powerful, but I guess I'm kind of drawing a blank now that I'm on the spot. I'm not remembering anything other than, my favorite Answer Infinity. And it's like, I'm sure as soon as I upload this Q&A, I'm going to remember 10 other bands where I'm like, oh, how could I absolutely forget this one? I feel like such an idiot. The Dirty Youth from Wales. Absolutely love that band. And a friend of mine knows the guitarist. It's a fun, long, weird story. Actually, I found out because we were sitting on my couch one day and I played her the music video that we just came out with. And she was like, yeah, that's cool. You guys sort of kind of sound like my friend's band. I'm like, really? What are they? And she told me the name. We looked it up and I'm like, how have I been hanging out with you for years and you never told me that one of your good friends is in a band with music that I would love to listen to? We kind of laughed at each other for that one. But yeah, the Dirty Youth, phenomenal. I love their music. It's a little more on the poppy side than metal, but I just think it's awesome. Their new album's great. They're all great. The song, we even covered the song Fight because we did a gig at a casino where you had to throw in some covers. No one was listening anyway. Everybody was just gambling. No one could care. I could have been on stage standing on my head spinning in circles and no one would have paid attention to me, let alone a band. But we ended up covering it and it came out pretty good and everything. So I can't believe I that should have been one of the first to pop in my mind. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be others on there, but definitely the Dirty Youth, Answer Infinity, and Shamefully, if you want to check out my stuff. There's links out there to download it for free if you'd like. It's on Spotify. It's just 2 weeks. So, Dr. Mookhouse said they recently reacquired their family's Commodore 64, a US version, and they're not sure what the options are out there in the world for either getting an AV cable with a more standard composite signal or a component output. I would recommend just searching RetroRGB. I remember Vanessa did a couple of posts about the Commodore 64. I believe there's component video mods and HDMI mods even. And I believe Commodore 64 is, at least most models, you can just get an S-video cable. I think depending on the model, you might have to get a more custom cable for it. But I believe that that's the standard way that a lot of people connect theirs to monitors. So, yeah, I would search the website first just to make sure there's nothing new that I'm drawing a blank and forgetting about, and just do some basic research on that exact model. Maybe check out the model number on the bottom and see what options are available. But I am not even remotely close to an expert on retro PCs. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I'm pretty sure you can get at the very least an S-video output without doing any mod to it. Clint Collage wanted to thank me for sharing that Argon 1 Raspberry Pi 4 case. Yeah, I really love it. I've been using it a lot. It makes everything so much easier to have the HDMI port converted like that. I really wish I listened to my friend's recommendation and just got that the moment they told me about it. And if anybody wants a link, check out the AM2R post from last week, and the links are all in there, probably right up at the top and towards the bottom with a picture of it if you'd like to know more info. But Clint's actual question, am I aware of anybody doing something like that for the Mister? There's a bunch of people making cool custom cases for the Mister that integrate controller inputs and do a bunch of other cool things. The problem is availability. I know a bunch of them that I've seen are one-offs that are amazing. I know a bunch of people that are able to put them out in lower quantities, but I don't know of anybody making weird and unique cases available today, at least, in large volumes. There's stuff coming, but I have no idea when, and I have no idea how many are coming in at the time, or even what price they're going to be, what features. So, if I'm missing anything, please let me know. But as far as I know, I'll let everybody know, and I'll certainly do a post when a big stock of like a pro-made one is available. But if I'm missing any, please let me know. I do always listen, and I always feel bad if I'm missing a product that's out there. I never mean to exclude somebody by talking about one thing. It's always like the drummer syndrome. I always use that stupid analogy, like, inevitably speaking, when a band gets a new drummer, somebody asks them, how's your new drummer going? And they go, oh, they're great. doing a great job. And somebody in the comment goes, oh, so fuck your old drummer then, huh? You don't even care about your old... It's the same type of thing. Whenever I talk about a product that I like and I forget or don't even know that there's other versions available, people freak out on me, and it's not intentional. So now I'm not obviously not saying anything towards you, Clint. I'm just talking in general. You linked to one that's the MSTR case that kind of looks like a CPS2. That looks absolutely awesome. But I don't know that that's out for purchase yet. I'm going to follow that thread, though. That looks like a cool case. So if there's anything like, I hate to use this word, but commercially available, like Pork Chop Express is working really hard to get cases back in stock. And when they are in stock, there's a lot of them. It's one of the many reasons why I promote that website, because it's not, hey, I've built 5 of them, who wants one? It's, I just got a giant shipment in. I have a lot available for a lot of people, and that's the type of stuff I prefer to promote. Because the fact is, if I promote something that only has 5 of them in stock and 5,000 people want them, I usually just get a ton of hatred. And so do the people making them. And I don't want to have either of us deal with that. So something, big, good run of production, something that looks like a commercial product. If I don't already know about it, please keep me in the loop. I want to make sure to post links to that, to promote everybody's work, and to really celebrate it. Or I guess if there's some really cool, unique one-offs that are open source that people could then make themselves, I think that's really awesome as well. So I'll keep everybody informed of stuff that I find out about, and let me know if I miss anything. Andrew says a friend of theirs is moving to a dorm room in college where they won't have space to bring all their classic consoles and a CRT, and will have to use a flat panel. They enjoy streaming speedruns of games across the SNES, Game Boy Color, Advance, and GameCube, and Wii libraries. Primary concerns are input lag, space, and budget. I think the best options would probably be a Wii U for its backward compatibility, via Wii support and GameCube via Nintendo, as well as virtual console releases and homebrew emulation, and a Rad2X Nintendo multi-out for use with an SNES or GameCube if they decide to need original hardware for performing runs. I think you nailed it. I think do whatever you can through the Wii U simply because of ease of use. It's not the best emulation solution out there, but it's doable. The only factor here is speedruns, because even if you're just doing casually, it's my strong opinion, it's just an opinion, but if I lose at a game, or if I'm not able to perform as well as I want to, and it's my fault because I don't have the skills to do it, that's awesome. I'll keep trying. Maybe I'll get better. Maybe I'll give up and move on to something else. But if I can't complete something the way I want to do it because of the hardware that I'm using, I'm pissed. So that's why I always try to get a decent arcade stick when I'm playing, especially when I'm playing my really awesome, pro fighter friends. If I ever get a chance to win, I want to make sure I earned that. And when I lose, it's still cool. And I think it's the same thing. Most people's mentality with speedruns is, if they're really going for within seconds of each other, do they really want to lose a few seconds because of not the perfect solution? So I think you nailed it. If they're going for a pro run that they're going to beat a record, you got to have to find your original hardware. You could totally find a low lag flat panel. I always talk about that crappy HP monitor I have. It's not that great. It scales 480p terribly. There's a lot of, a light bleed in there, but it's like averages 2 milliseconds of lag, which 2 milliseconds, you won't even be able to, that will not affect your speed run. That will not affect your fighting tournament. As much as a lot of, especially one group of fighting players likes to say 2 milliseconds matter, they're saying that because they're mad that they lost and they want an excuse. Hate me all you want for saying that. That is the honest truth. 2 milliseconds when you're practicing your speed runs should not affect that at all. Tool assisted speed runs maybe, but that would require you to have a camera in front of the monitor. I don't think that would affect it. So my suggestion would be to find the lowest lag flat panel possible, a Rad2X or a RetroTink if you're or any of the zero lag solutions going into that if you need to use original hardware, and if you're available, or if it fits the setup to practice using emulation, a hacked Wii U could probably give you a lot of what you need, if not all of it. So I think you already kind of nailed it. I wanted to just reiterate for everybody, and I really do think a cheap monitor, it doesn't even necessarily have to be gaming, as long as it has low latency, should be totally fine for that and to save you space. It might not look as good as an expensive monitor or a CRT, but I mean, unless having an image that's not perfectly sharp affects your speedrun, then it won't matter. Sean Kyosho Brown wants to know if I know of a lag-free component video to S-video converter, because they have a full component video setup, but they just picked up a CRT that they want to use for light gun games, and it has an S-video input. So that would make perfect sense. You split the component video output using a proper method, or just the second output of your G-Comp switch, plug it into a device, and then plug that into your TV, and now you have dual output. I don't know of a direct component video one. Linux Spot 3000, I always showed this one because it happens to be sitting right next to me. They have a SCART version of this as well that goes down. Ashenworks has one. Mike Chi has the open source one. They all go to S-video properly. None of these devices will go to composite video properly. It's not their fault. It's a long, boring thing that ends in how the signal is encoded. But I don't know of a direct one. You could try going from a comp to RGB, then getting a SCART coupler, and then going into a SCART version of one of these and seeing if that works. I don't know if the multiple conversions would affect light gun games. I don't think so, but you would have to keep that in mind. But the one point I want to make is even if it does work perfect, you're talking over $100 worth of stuff, where if your goal is just to get a bunch of cheap S-video cables, you could probably grab a couple from AliExpress, and they're going to have composite bleed. They're not going to, they'll have a bit of a checkerboarding pattern, but they're going to be cheap, and they're totally going to do the job for light guns. I mean, or you could invest in some decent ones, and depending on on the console and everything. But overall, depending on how many consoles you use, it might be significantly cheaper just to get individual cables. But I do understand that completely defeats the purpose of ease of use. Then you only have to turn on the console and everything's automatic right there. Like, I totally get the other side. I just wouldn't feel like I was giving you the right advice if I didn't at least mention the cost factor in all of this stuff. And once again, I did try these with 3D glasses, and I think with light guns too, and they worked fine. But I don't think I did a double conversion. So you would have to go into that understanding that it may or may not work. Probably will, but I just wanted to be upfront and honest. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to any of these Q&As, ask absolutely any question you feel like wherever it is that you support, and please ask in the newest Q&A post. So right now, if you wanted to ask a question for next week, you would post a question in this one, wherever it is you support, Patreon, Floatplane, YouTube Direct, anything like that. Just the way these services work, it's near impossible to sort through comments and figure out which ones I've answered before, which ones I haven't. Plus, I do kind of think it's a lot of fun to just scroll through the services and answer questions like that. So answer or ask wherever it is that you support in the newest Q&A post. If I ever skip it or miss it, it's almost never intentional. It's usually that I accidentally deleted a file in post, or mistook a double post like I did last week or something. So please re-ask if I miss it, or if it's super important, you could just message me right through those services. And as always, thank you to everybody that participates in these, because I have a ton of fun doing them. And thank you so much to everybody that supports in any way possible. I feel like a broken record and a bit of a shill saying this every week, but I do genuinely mean thank you to everybody that supports in any way, whether it's just clicking through affiliate links, whether it's tipping or anything, or even jumping in for super chats, and especially the monthly support platforms is what's really keeping all of this going. And I'd like to continue to keep this going as long as I can, but I certainly can't do that without your support. So if you're already a supporter, thank you so much. Maybe possibly consider spreading the word. And even if you can't afford it right now because there's stuff going on in the world, I totally get that too. But sharing and spreading the word is free, so I would certainly appreciate that. But anyway, thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.